The distress beacon had been silent for 300 years, when Dr. Lisa Morgan first detected it beneath the red dust of Varus 7, and she almost ignored it as background radiation until her scanner pulsed a second time, then a third, each pulse stronger than the last. She stood at the edge of a massive crater, her environmental suit humming softly against the thin atmosphere, and she felt her heart race as the readings confirmed what seemed impossible. There was a ship down there, buried under centuries of sediment, and something inside it was still alive. Nova Station hung in orbit above her, a spinning wheel of metal and light that humans had called home for the past 5 years. And Commander Nathan Cole's voice crackled through her helmet radio, asking if she had found anything interesting on her survey. "I think I found something extraordinary," she whispered back, her voice trembling with excitement and disbelief. The excavation took 3 days, and during that time, Lisa barely slept, driven by a curiosity that burned hotter than any star she had ever studied. The ship that emerged from the red soil was unlike anything in human records, its hull covered in symbols that predated the oldest known civilizations, its design elegant and organic in ways that made human engineering look crude by comparison. Inside the wreckage, past corridors filled with dust and silence, she found the chamber, and in the center of that chamber sat a single egg, resting on a platform of crystallized energy. The egg was beautiful, roughly the size of a basketball, its swirling with colors that shifted between deep purple and brilliant gold. And when Lisa reached out to touch it, she felt warmth pulse against her gloved fingers like a heartbeat. She brought it back to Nova Station that same day, carrying it in her arms like the precious thing it was, and the crew gathered around her in the main laboratory with wide eyes and hushed voices. Commander Nathan Cole stood with his arms crossed, his weathered face showing the concern of a man responsible for 47 lives on a station far from home. He was not happy about unknown alien objects being brought aboard, but he trusted Lisa's judgment enough to let her proceed with caution. "What is it?" asked Danny Moore, a young maintenance engineer with curious brown eyes and a gentle voice, leaning closer to examine the swirling patterns on the shell. "I have no idea," Lisa admitted, "but whatever species created that ship has been gone for thousands of years, and this might be the only survivor." They set up monitoring equipment around the egg, tracking its temperature and energy output, and for 2 days nothing happened. The egg sat there, beautiful and mysterious, while the crew debated what to do with it and whether they should contact Earth for guidance. On the 3rd night, Danny was alone in the laboratory, running a routine check on the environmental systems, when he heard a sound like cracking ice. He turned to see thin lines spreading across the surface of the egg, golden light spilling through the fractures, and before he could call for help, the shell split open. The creature that emerged was small enough to fit in his cupped hands, covered in scales that shimmered like liquid fire, with wings that were still wet and folded against its back. It had 4 legs, a long tail, and eyes that glowed with intelligence far beyond any animal Danny had ever seen. It looked exactly like the dragons from the old Earth legends, the stories his grandmother used to tell him when he was a child. And for a long moment, he simply stared in wonder. The hatchling made a soft chirping sound and stumbled toward him on unsteady legs. And without thinking, Danny reached down and scooped it up. The creature was warm against his chest, its tiny claws gripping his shirt, and when it looked up at him, he felt something strange wash over his mind. It was not words exactly, more like feelings and images pressed directly into his thoughts. He sensed fear and confusion and loneliness, but beneath all of that, he felt trust, a desperate need for comfort that made his heart ache. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, stroking the scales along its back. "You are safe now, I promise." Lisa arrived minutes later, having been alerted by the monitoring equipment, and she froze in the doorway at the sight of Danny cradling a dragon in his arms. "Is that?" she started. "I think so," Danny replied with a nervous laugh. They spent the rest of the night studying the hatchling, which allowed Lisa to take measurements and samples without any sign of distress as long as Danny stayed close. The creature had clearly imprinted on him, following his movements with those glowing eyes and making unhappy sounds whenever he moved too far away. By morning, Lisa had cross-referenced the creature's genetic markers with every database available to human science, and what she found made her go pale. "This is a Kyreth," she announced to the assembled crew, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were supposed to be extinct for over 10,000 years. Commander Cole demanded an explanation, and Lisa gave one. According to ancient galactic records, the Kyreths were once the most revered species in the known universe, beings of immense power and intelligence who could manipulate energy fields with their minds, creatures that entire civilizations had worshipped as gods. They were hunted to extinction," Lisa continued, "by a coalition of predatory species who wanted their power for themselves, and the last Kyreths vanished before humans ever left Earth." The crew fell silent, processing the weight of what they had discovered. They were not just caring for an unusual alien animal. They were protecting the last member of a species that the galaxy had mourned for millennia. Danny looked down at the hatchling curled up in his lap, and he felt a surge of protective instinct that surprised him with its intensity. This tiny creature had no one else, no family, no home, nothing but a group of humans on a lonely station in the middle of nowhere. "We need to name her," he said quietly. "Her?" Cole raised an eyebrow. "I can feel it," Danny explained, tapping his temple. "She sends me impressions sometimes, feelings and images, and I just know." Lisa nodded slowly. Kyreth were said to be telepathic, able to form deep bonds with other sentient beings. "What do you want to call her?" she asked. Danny watched the hatchling stretch her tiny wings, scales catching the light and flickering like flames, and the answer came to him immediately. "Ember," he said with a smile. "Her name is Ember." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest Nova Station had ever known. Ember grew quickly, doubling in size within the first month, and her personality emerged with delightful clarity. She was curious and playful, always exploring the station's corridors and getting into places she should not be. She also proved to be remarkably intelligent, learning to understand human speech within days, and communicating her own thoughts through increasingly complex empathic impressions. The crew fell in love with her one by one. Even Commander Cole, who pretended to be annoyed when Ember knocked over his coffee, but could often be found sneaking her treats when he thought no one was watching. But Danny remained her favorite, her chosen guardian, and where he went, she followed. At night she slept curled at the foot of his bed, and during the day she perched on his shoulder while he worked on the station's systems. They had become family without even realizing it. Nobody on Nova Station knew that their communications had been intercepted, that somewhere across the vast darkness of space, hungry eyes had turned toward Varus 7. Nobody knew that the last Kyreth in existence had just become the most valuable prey in the galaxy. The hunters were already on their way. The ship that dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Varus system was called the Fang of Silence, and it had earned that name through centuries of death. Its hull was black as the void between stars, covered in the symbols of 100 conquered species, and its cargo holds contained trophies that would make any collector weep with envy. High Stalker Kesrath stood on the bridge, his 4 arms folded across his armored chest, watching the tiny human station grow larger on the view screen. He was tall even by Vrethak standards, his scaled skin the color of dried blood, his yellow eyes burning with the patient hunger of a predator who had never failed to claim his prey. "A Kyreth," he said softly, savoring the word like a rare delicacy. "The last Kyreth in existence, and it falls into the hands of these soft little creatures." His second-in-command, a scarred hunter named Vex, clicked his mandibles in agreement. The Vrethak Consortium had hunted the Kyraths to extinction 10,000 years ago, mounting their heads in the great halls of their homeworld. And now one had returned from the grave like a gift from the hunting gods themselves. The humans will not surrender it willingly, Vex observed. They have laws about such things. Kesrath laughed, a harsh sound like grinding stones. He had heard that excuse from 100 species before, and it had never stopped him from taking what he wanted. Send the envoy, he commanded. Let us see how devoted they are to their precious laws. On Nova Station, Commander Nathan Cole received the communication request with growing unease. The ship that had appeared in their system matched no known design in human databases, and its weapon signature suggested military capability far beyond anything the station could defend against. He accepted the hail, and the face that appeared on his screen made his blood run cold. He had never seen a Vrethak before, but he had heard stories from other species at trading posts, whispered warnings about the hunters who took whatever they pleased. I am High Stalker Kesrath of the Vrethak Consortium, the alien announced, his voice carrying the confidence of absolute power, and you have something that belongs to me. This is a human research station, Cole replied, keeping his voice steady despite his fear. We have nothing of yours. You have a Kirath, Kesrath said simply, a creature more valuable than your entire species combined, and I have come to claim it. Cole felt anger rise in his chest, pushing past the fear. Behind him, the bridge crew had gone silent, listening to every word. The creature you are referring to is a protected species under the Galactic Preservation Accords, Cole stated firmly. She is not property. She is not a trophy, and she is under our protection. Kesrath leaned forward, his yellow eyes gleaming with amusement. He found these humans entertaining in their defiance, like small animals puffing up to appear larger. I will make you an offer, he said, his tone almost friendly. Give me the Karath, and I will compensate your station generously. Refuse, and I will take it anyway, along with your heads as souvenirs. My answer is no, Cole said without hesitation. Kesrath smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. He had hoped the humans would refuse, because the hunt was always more satisfying when the prey resisted. You have 12 hours to reconsider, he said, and then the screen went dark. Cole immediately called an emergency meeting, gathering the senior staff in the conference room. Dr. Lisa Morgan was there, along with Security Officer Kate Bishop, Chief Engineer Sam Howard, and Danny Moore, who had brought Ember despite the creature's obvious distress. The little dragon was agitated, her scales flickering with nervous energy, and she pressed herself against Danny's chest while projecting feelings of danger and fear into his mind. She knew they were coming, Danny said quietly. She has been anxious for 2 days now, and I did not understand why until this moment. Lisa looked at the trembling creature with new understanding. Kyraths were supposed to be sensitive to threats, able to detect hostile intent from great distances, and Ember had been trying to warn them. What are we dealing with? Cole asked, looking at Lisa. The Vrethak Consortium, Lisa replied grimly. They are the ones who hunted the Kyraths to extinction, and they have been doing the same to rare species across the galaxy for thousands of years. They operate outside any law, and they have never been successfully prosecuted for their crimes. Kate Bishop, a former military officer with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, studied the tactical readouts on her datapad. The enemy ship outgunned them by a factor of 10, and their security team numbered only 8 people with light weapons. We cannot win a direct fight, she admitted, but we can make them pay for every inch. Cole nodded slowly, his mind racing through options. They were too far from human space for immediate help, but if they could send a distress signal and hold out long enough, reinforcements might arrive in time. Sam, he said, turning to the chief engineer, can you boost our communications array, punch through any jamming they might use? Sam Howard scratched his gray beard thoughtfully. He was the oldest member of the crew, a veteran of 3 decades in space, and he had solved harder problems than this one. "I can try," he said, "but it will take time, and they will probably detect the signal." "Do it," Cole ordered. "Kate, I want everyone armed and ready. If they come aboard, we make them regret it." The next 8 hours passed in tense preparation. Crew members who had never held weapons before learned how to use them. Barricades were built in key corridors, and emergency protocols were drilled until everyone knew their role. Danny stayed with Ember in the laboratory, trying to keep her calm, but the little dragon grew more frightened as midnight approached. She kept sending him images of fire and death, memories that did not belong to her, ancestral terrors passed down through generations of Kairats who had been hunted before she was even born. "I will not let them take you," Danny promised, holding her close. "I will die first." Ember looked up at him with those glowing eyes, and he felt her response flood through his mind. She was not afraid for herself. She was afraid for him, for all of them, these strange soft creatures who had shown her kindness in a universe that wanted her dead. The attack came at 3 in the morning, when human alertness was at its lowest. The Vrefak infiltration team breached the station through the cargo bay, cutting through the hull with plasma torches, moving in perfect silence like the predators they were. Kate Bishop saw them first on the security monitors, 6 armored hunters advancing through the lower decks, and she triggered the alarm before grabbing her rifle and running to intercept them. The firefight in Corridor 7 was brief and brutal. Kate held the junction point alone, dropping 2 hunters with precise shots before they even knew she was there. But the others adapted quickly, their superior training and equipment overwhelming her position. She took a plasma bolt to the shoulder, the impact spinning her around and slamming her against the wall. But she kept firing even as she fell, giving Danny enough time to escape through the maintenance tunnels, with Ember clutched to his chest. 2 crew members did not make it out. Dr. Henry Park was killed defending the medical bay, and Ensign Amy Richards died trying to seal a breach in the hull. Their deaths were quick but not painless, and their screams echoed through the station's corridors. The hunters withdrew just before dawn, dragging their dead with them, leaving behind only blood and destruction. They had failed to capture Ember, but they had made their point. Kezrath's voice filled the station's speakers moments later, calm and patient despite the setback. "You have cost me 2 warriors," he said, "and for that I admire you. But this changes nothing. Deliver the creature within 12 hours, or I will reduce your station to debris and pick through the wreckage for what I want." In the damaged conference room, surrounded by wounded crew members and the bodies of their fallen friends, Commander Cole made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. "Get that distress signal out," he ordered Sam Howard. "Tell them what we are protecting, what we have lost, and what we need." The signal launched into the void, carrying a desperate plea toward human space. All they could do now was wait and hope that someone was listening. The morning after the attack brought no comfort, only the harsh reality of their situation. Nova Station was crippled, its hull breached in 3 places, its power systems running on emergency reserves, and 2 of its crew members were dead. Commander Cole stood over the covered bodies of Dr. Henry Park and Ensign Amy Richards, his face carved from stone as he fought to keep his emotions under control. He had promised to bring everyone home safely, and now he had to live with the weight of that broken promise. "We do not have 12 hours, Sam Howard reported, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "The station's orbit is decaying, and life support will fail in 8 if we do not get repairs done." Kate Bishop was in the medical bay, her shoulder wrapped in bandages, refusing to stay down despite the pain. She had already armed herself again and was organizing the remaining security personnel for another defense. But it was Danny who came forward with the plan that no one wanted to hear. "I have to take Ember to the surface," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. The Vrethak sensors will have trouble tracking us through the mineral deposits in those caves, and it will buy time for the distress signal to reach someone. Cole shook his head immediately. The idea of sending a young engineer alone onto an alien planet with hunters in pursuit was madness. "I will not send you to die," the commander said firmly. "With respect, sir," Danny replied. "If I stay here, we all die. Ember is what they want, and if she is not on the station, maybe they will not destroy it. Maybe they will chase us instead." Lisa Morgan stepped forward, her scientific mind already working through the possibilities. Danny was right about the caves. The mineral composition would scatter most scanning technology, and the Vrethak would have to hunt on foot if they wanted to find their prey. "It could work," she admitted reluctantly, "long enough for help to arrive." Ember, who had been listening from Danny's shoulder, sent a pulse of emotion into his mind that surprised everyone who could sense it. The little dragon was afraid, but beneath the fear was determination, a fierce willingness to run if it meant keeping her family safe. "She agrees," Danny said with a sad smile. "She wants to protect all of you as much as you want to protect her." The preparations took less than an hour. They loaded the mining shuttle with emergency supplies, medical equipment, and enough food to last a week. Danny said goodbye to each crew member, accepting their handshakes and hugs with the quiet dignity of someone who knew he might not return. Kate Bishop pressed a small communicator into his hand, a device hardened against interference that could send a single burst transmission if he found himself in trouble. "Stay alive," she told him, her eyes fierce despite her wounds. "That is an order." "Yes, ma'am," Danny replied, managing a weak grin. The shuttle launched through a damaged docking port, slipping past the Fang of Silence while the Vrethak were focused on the station. Danny flew low and fast, using the planet's atmosphere to mask his approach, and within 20 minutes he had landed in a narrow canyon near the entrance to the cave system. Ember clung to his chest as they entered the darkness, her scales providing just enough light to see by, her empathic senses reaching out to detect any threats in the shadows ahead. The caves were vast and ancient, carved by water that had long since dried up, and they stretched for hundreds of kilometers beneath the red surface of Varus 7. Above them, the Fang of Silence detected the shuttle's descent, and Kezraf smiled with savage pleasure. The prey was running, which meant the real hunt could begin. He assembled his best trackers, 5 hunters who had never lost a target, and led them personally to the surface. This Kirath would be his greatest trophy, and he would not trust anyone else to claim it. The chase through the caves lasted for 6 brutal hours. Danny moved as fast as he dared through the twisting tunnels, guided by Ember's instincts and his own survival training. But the Vrethak were faster. Their eyes adapted for darkness, their bodies built for pursuit. He heard them behind him, their claws scraping against stone, their hunting calls echoing through the passages like the screams of predators closing in for the kill. Ember was exhausted, her small body trembling with the effort of maintaining her empathic awareness. But she refused to give up. She kept sending Danny images of safe paths, hidden passages, places where they could rest for a few precious minutes before moving again. They were crossing a narrow bridge over an underground river when the first plasma bolt struck the wall beside Danny's head. He dove forward, covering Ember with his body, and felt searing pain as a second shot grazed his ribs. Blood soaked through his shirt, hot and wet, but he forced himself to keep moving. The hunters were right behind him now, close enough that he could hear their breathing, smell the alien stink of their excitement. Ember made a sound he had never heard before, a keening cry that built in intensity until it hurt his ears, and then she released something that had been sleeping inside her since before she was born. Energy exploded outward from her tiny body, a shockwave of pure force that slammed into the ceiling above the pursuing hunters. The rock cracked and groaned, then collapsed in a thundering avalanche that sealed the tunnel behind them. Danny stared at the little dragon in amazement. She had just saved both their lives, using power that should have been impossible for a creature her size. But the effort had cost her. Ember went limp in his arms, her glow fading to almost nothing, her breathing shallow and weak. She had given everything she had, and now she needed him to carry her the rest of the way. He pressed on through the darkness, one hand holding Ember against his chest, the other clutching his wounded side. The pain was constant now, a throbbing reminder that he was bleeding faster than he should be. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time lost meaning in the black depths of those alien caves. Danny stumbled and fell more than once, scraping his knees and palms on the rough stone. But each time he forced himself back to his feet. Ember stirred occasionally, sending him fragments of comfort and encouragement, her trust in him unwavering, even as both of their bodies failed. Above them, on Nova Station, the situation had grown desperate. The Vrethak had resumed their bombardment after Kesrath descended to the surface, punishing the humans for their defiance with precise strikes that tore the station apart piece by piece. Commander Cole ordered the remaining crew into the central hub, the most protected section of the station, and they huddled together as explosions rocked the walls around them. Sam Howard had managed to boost the communications array before the attack resumed, and the distress signal was now broadcasting continuously, screaming into the void for anyone who could hear. Lisa Morgan held Kate Bishop's hand, both women wounded and exhausted, watching the hull integrity readings drop towards zero. "Someone will come," Lisa whispered, more prayer than statement. "They'd better come soon," Kate replied grimly. And then, just as the final section of the station's outer ring was about to collapse, the sensors detected new contacts dropping out of faster-than-light travel. One ship, not two, but an entire fleet. The humans had heard the call, and they had brought the fire of retribution with them. Admiral Grace Sullivan had commanded warships for 30 years, and in all that time, she had never felt rage quite like this. She stood on the bridge of the USS Horizon, a Titan-class battlecruiser bristling with enough firepower to crack a moon in half, and she watched the tactical display with eyes as cold as the void itself. The distress signal from Nova Station had reached the Fifth Fleet while they were conducting routine patrols near the border of human space, and the moment Sullivan heard the recording, she had ordered every ship under her command to prepare for combat operations. A human station attacked, 2 crew members dead, a protected species hunted by aliens who believed themselves above the law. These were not circumstances that called for diplomacy. Behind the horizon came 3 destroyer escorts, the Vigilance, the Defiant, and the Ironside, along with the assault carrier Nemesis, loaded with 400 combat marines ready to deploy at a moment's notice. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, emerging from the darkness like avenging angels, their weapons already charging with the promise of destruction. On the bridge of the Fang of Silence, the Vrethak sensor officer went pale as he read the incoming contacts. "Hi, Stalker," he stammered. "Human warships, 5 of them, military class." Vex, who had been left in command while Kesrath hunted on the surface, stared at the display in disbelief. No one had ever responded to a distress call this quickly, with this much force, over something as simple as a hunting expedition. Admiral Sullivan's face appeared on their view screen before they could even attempt to flee, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her uniform immaculate, her expression carrying the weight of judgment. "This is Admiral Grace Sullivan of the United Earth Navy," she announced, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You have attacked a human installation. You have killed human citizens. You have attempted to harm a creature under our protection. Stand down immediately and prepare to be boarded, or we will reduce your ship to atoms." Vex hesitated. The hunting code demanded defiance in the face of threats, but he was not Kesrath, and he could see the mathematical reality of their situation. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and outmatched in every way that mattered. He opened a channel to the planet's surface, hoping his leader would have the wisdom to recognize defeat. "High Stalker," he said urgently, "the humans have sent a fleet. We cannot win this fight. I recommend immediate withdrawal." Kezrath's response came back filled with contempt. He was still in the caves, still pursuing his prey, and he refused to believe that these soft creatures would actually follow through on their threats. "They are bluffing," he snarled. "Humans always bluff. Maintain position and wait for my return." Vex wanted to argue, but the hunting code left no room for disobedience. He closed the channel and turned back to the view screen, where Admiral Sullivan was waiting with cold patience. "Your answer?" she asked. "We do not recognize your authority," Vex replied, his voice hollow with resignation. "We serve the Consortium." Sullivan nodded once, as if she had expected nothing less. She turned to her weapons officer and spoke a single word: "Fire." The Horizon's main railgun batteries spoke first, launching tungsten rounds at velocities that made them nearly impossible to dodge. The two Vrethak escort ships that had been flanking the Fang of Silence disappeared in twin explosions of fire and debris, their shields overwhelmed before they could even raise them fully. The destroyers followed suit, their precision lasers cutting through the Fang of Silence's engines with surgical accuracy. The great hunting ship lurched and began to drift, its propulsion systems crippled in a matter of seconds. Vex watched his tactical display fill with red warning lights, and knew that the hunt was over. They had become the prey. On the surface of Varus 7, Danny heard the explosions echo through the cave entrance, and felt hope surge through his exhausted body. Someone had come, someone had answered the call, and now he just had to stay alive long enough to be rescued. Ember stirred against his chest, her glow returning slowly as she recovered from her earlier exertion. She sent him feelings of surprise and wonder, sensing the arrival of the fleet, through some ability he could not understand. "Help is here," Danny whispered to her. "We just have to hold on a little longer." But they were not safe yet. Kezrath was still down here with them, and the High Stalker was not the kind of predator who gave up easily. The Marine dropships launched from the Nemesis within minutes of the engagement, their pilots pushing the engines to maximum as they screamed toward the planet's surface. Lieutenant Chris Palmer sat in the lead ship, checking his weapon for the 4th time, his squad of 12 Marines ready for combat. They had received the mission briefing during the approach: locate and rescue the human survivor, recover the protected creature, eliminate any hostile forces. Simple objectives that could easily become complicated in the maze of those alien caves. Palmer's tracking equipment locked onto Danny's emergency beacon the moment they entered the atmosphere, and he directed the pilots to set down at the canyon entrance where the abandoned shuttle still sat. "Move fast," he ordered his squad as they hit the ground running. "The survivor is wounded, and we have hostiles in the tunnels." The Marines entered the caves in tactical formation, their helmet lights cutting through the darkness, their weapons sweeping every shadow for threats. They moved with the precision of soldiers who had trained for exactly this kind of operation, and they covered ground quickly. Kezrath heard them coming and felt rage burn through his ancient heart. His hunt was being interrupted, his prey was being stolen, and these humans had the audacity to bring war to his doorstep. He had 4 hunters left after the tunnel collapse, and he gathered them in an ambush position near a wide cavern where the pursuit had led them. If he could not have the Kirath, he would at least make the humans pay in blood. The firefight erupted without warning, plasma bolts and bullets filling the air with deadly light. 2 Marines fell in the first exchange, their armor unable to withstand the concentrated fire. But Palmer and his squad adapted immediately, taking cover and returning fire with devastating accuracy. The Vrethak were skilled hunters, but they were not soldiers. They had spent centuries preying on creatures that could not fight back, and they had forgotten what it meant to face an enemy that refused to die. One by one, the hunters fell. Palmer himself put 3 rounds through the chest of a Vrethak who tried to flank their position, and his sergeant took down 2 more with a burst of automatic fire. Kesrath watched his followers die, and felt something he had not experienced in over 1,000 years of hunting: fear. He tried to flee, to disappear into the darkness and escape to fight another day. But Palmer had anticipated this. A second fire team had circled around through a parallel tunnel, cutting off the High Stalker's retreat. "On your knees," Palmer commanded, his rifle trained on Kesrath's head. "Hands where I can see them." For a long moment, Kesrath considered fighting, considered dying with honor as the hunting code demanded. But then he thought of the trials that would follow, the testimony he could give to condemn his enemies, the possibility, however small, of eventual freedom. He knelt. The Marines secured him with restraints designed for creatures far stronger than any human, and then Palmer pressed on toward Danny's beacon. He found the young engineer collapsed against a cave wall, barely conscious, his shirt soaked with blood, with a small dragon-like creature curled protectively around him. Ember looked up at the approaching soldiers with suspicious eyes, her scales flickering with warning light, and she projected feelings of threat toward anyone who came too close. "Easy there, little one," Palmer said softly, lowering his weapon. "We are here to help." Danny stirred at the sound of a human voice, his eyes fluttering open, and he managed a weak smile when he saw the Marine uniforms. "About time," he whispered. Palmer laughed despite the tension, impressed by the kid's spirit. He knelt down and carefully checked Danny's wounds, noting the severity of the blood loss and the fever that was starting to set in. "Medic," he called over his shoulder. "We need evac now." Ember watched the Marines tend to Danny with growing trust. She could feel their intentions, their genuine concern for her guardian, and slowly her defensive posture relaxed. When one of the medics reached out to lift Danny onto a stretcher, Ember allowed it. She even permitted Palmer to carry her, sensing in him the same protective instinct that she had felt in Danny from the very beginning. The rescue was complete, but the reckoning was only just beginning. The images spread across human networks within hours of the rescue, and they struck a chord that resonated deep within the collective human soul. A young man covered in his own blood, barely clinging to life, with a small dragon curled protectively around him, scales glowing softly in the darkness of an alien cave. Danny Moore and Ember became symbols overnight, their faces appearing on news broadcasts and social media feeds across every human colony, their story told and retold until it became legend. Here was proof of everything humanity liked to believe about itself, that they would protect the innocent, that they would stand against cruelty, that they would not abandon those who needed them. The United Earth Council convened an emergency session 3 days after the rescue, gathering representatives from every major colony and station to address the attack on Nova Station. The debate was fierce but brief, with voices from across the political spectrum united in their outrage. "We cannot let this stand," declared Councilwoman Maria Santos, her words broadcast to billions of viewers. "The Vrethak Consortium has hunted species to extinction for millennia, and now they have brought their cruelty to our doorstep. They killed our people, they tried to take a creature under our protection, and they believed we would simply accept it." She paused, her eyes burning with conviction. They were wrong. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in its history, humanity declared retribution against an alien power, authorizing military action against the Vrethak Consortium with the explicit goal of dismantling their hunting operations permanently. Admiral Sullivan was given overall command of the campaign, with a fleet that grew to 47 warships within 2 weeks, as vessels arrived from every corner of human space. It was the largest military deployment humanity had ever attempted, and it carried the weight of a civilization's fury. The offensive began at the edge of Vrethak space, where human forces struck a major hunting outpost without warning. The battle lasted 6 hours, and when it was over, the outpost was rubble, and 300 Vrethak hunters were in custody. From there, the fleet advanced methodically, targeting hunting stations and trophy halls across 4 star systems. At each location, they found evidence of atrocities that shocked even the most hardened soldiers. Thousands of preserved creatures from species that no longer existed, records of hunts that had wiped out entire populations, trophies taken from sentient beings who had begged for mercy. The footage was released to the galactic community, and species that had previously tolerated the Vrethak as an unpleasant but unavoidable reality began to reconsider their positions. The consortium had always been careful to avoid hunting the citizens of powerful civilizations, but the scale of their crimes against the weak and defenseless could no longer be ignored. Support for humanity's campaign grew, first quietly and then openly, as other species offered intelligence, supply routes, and in some cases, direct military assistance. The Vrethak found themselves isolated, their allies abandoning them, their trade partners refusing to deal with them, their empire crumbling from within as member species sought to distance themselves from the catastrophe. The assault on the Vrethak homeworld came 6 weeks after the campaign began, and it was not a battle so much as a surrender. The consortium leadership, seeing the inevitability of their defeat, agreed to unconditional terms rather than watch their cities burn. Human forces landed on the planet and entered the great trophy halls that had stood for 10,000 years, those monuments to cruelty and extinction that the Vrethak had been so proud of. The soldiers walked in silence through corridors lined with the mounted heads of creatures that would never exist again, and more than a few wept at the sight. The Kyraths were there, a full gallery dedicated to the species that the Vrethak had hunted to supposed extinction. Dozens of magnificent heads mounted on the walls, their scales dulled by time, their eyes replaced with glass that could never capture the intelligence that had once burned there. Lieutenant Palmer stood before that gallery with Ember in his arms. The little dragon had insisted on coming, projecting her need to see with such intensity that no one could refuse her. She stared at the remains of her ancestors, her glow dimming with grief, and she made a sound that needed no translation. It was the cry of the last of her kind, mourning those who had come before. Palmer held her close and let her grieve, and around them, hard men and women who had killed without hesitation in battle, found themselves moved beyond words. High Stalker Kesrath was brought before the Galactic Assembly for trial, the first Vrethak ever to face justice for their hunting crimes. The proceedings lasted 3 weeks, with testimony from the survivors of Nova Station, footage from Ember's rescue, and evidence recovered from the trophy halls. Danny Moore testified via holographic link from the hospital where he was still recovering from his wounds, describing the attack on the station, the deaths of his friends, the desperate flight through the caves, and the moment when a tiny dragon used the last of her strength to save his life. She did not know me, Danny said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. She had no reason to trust me. I was an alien, a stranger, a creature from a species she had never encountered. But she chose to believe in me anyway, and when the moment came, she risked everything to protect me. He paused, looking directly at the assembled delegates from 100 different civilizations. That is what the Vrethak tried to hunt, not just a rare species, but the capacity for trust and love that makes the universe worth living in. If we let that be destroyed, if we let creatures like Kesrath decide what deserves to exist and what deserves to die, then we have already lost everything that matters. The verdict was guilty on all charges. Kesrath was sentenced to life imprisonment on a desolate moon at the edge of known space, where he would spend the rest of his very long existence contemplating the consequences of his cruelty. The Vrethak Consortium was formally dissolved, its members scattered and forbidden from engaging in hunting operations under penalty of immediate military response. The Galactic Preservation Accords were strengthened with enforcement mechanisms that had actual teeth, backed by a coalition of species that included humanity as a founding member. Ember was granted protected status under joint human and galactic custody, recognized as a treasure belonging to all sentient life. But the bureaucratic designation was largely meaningless. Everyone who had witnessed the bond between her and Danny understood where she truly belonged. 6 months after the rescue, Danny stood on a hillside on a peaceful colony world called New Eden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. The wound in his side had healed, leaving only a scar that would fade with time, and the nightmares that had plagued him in the weeks after the caves were finally beginning to subside. Ember lay beside him, her head resting on his lap, her scales catching the dying light like living fire. She was twice the size she had been when she hatched, and growing larger every day, but she still fit perfectly against him when she curled up to sleep. She projected a feeling toward him as they watched the sun sink below the horizon, a complex emotion that combined warmth and safety and gratitude and love into something that transcended any single word. Family. Danny smiled and stroked the scales along her neck, marveling as he always did at the impossible series of events that had brought them together. A crashed ship, a surviving egg, a desperate flight through alien caves, and a galaxy that had finally decided to draw a line. "You know what the best part is?" he said softly. Ember lifted her head and looked at him with those glowing eyes, curious and attentive. "We get to watch you grow up," Danny continued. "We get to see what you become, and nobody is ever going to take that away from us." The little dragon made a sound of contentment and settled back against him, her warmth a constant comfort in the cooling evening air. Across the galaxy, the message had been received and understood. Humanity did not abandon those under its protection. No matter how powerful the threat, no matter how long the odds, they had faced an empire of hunters and broken it, not for conquest or glory, but for a single creature who had no one else to fight for her. The dragon baby was safe, and anyone who threatened her would face the fire that followed.